Welcome to the place where we learn about and learn from the leaders in our field who are powering human creativity. I am Aaron Dworkin, and this is Arts Engines. Thanks again for joining me here on Arts Engines. Today's guest is Soovin Kim, who serves as violin faculty at the New England Conservatory, as well as artistic director of Lake Champlain Chamber Music Festival and artistic director of Chamber Music Northwest. Soovin, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Aaron. It's a little daunting to hear all of those titles.
Right, and that actually is going to end up being kind of one of my questions. However, I want to kind of delve into a couple other things, and also wanted to share with our audience that this show is co-curated with one of our wonderful creative partners, Chamber Music Northwest. And so also kind of, I think it would just be helpful for our audience, kind of, Soovin, can you just share a little just about Chamber Music Northwest and kind of what's involved in the program itself?
Chamber Music Northwest is an amazing organization based in Portland, Oregon. It is just over 50 years old, just celebrated its 50th birthday. And my wife, pianist Gloria Chen, and I just became co-artistic directors a year ago, following clarinetist David Schifrin, who was there for 40 years. And we put on about 25 to 35 performances during the summer festival, each June into July, and then maybe 6 to 8 programs during the year, during the concert season, as well as outreach activities. So it's a very active organization in the Northwest.
That's awesome. And kind of just a quick question, coming on board to that with the pandemic and all of that, how are things as a leader? How are you viewing that, and kind of how are you think things will unfold, especially this next year?
Well, you can imagine we officially took over, although there was planning before that, but officially we took over after last summer in 2020. So the first concert season that we planned from September to May, of course, was all scrapped. And we pivoted to an amazing online season. We opted to, and luckily our board backed us with the resources to actually create beautiful performance films, and it's more expensive. It takes up a lot more time and energy, but in the end, they were really, really beautiful. And we actually had we were very lucky. Our audience was extremely engaged in numbers all through the year, and so we actually, I think, as an organization and as a community, felt like we did still manage to have a meaningful musical experience. Having said that, it was very challenging. We were unable to do much outreach at all. Of course, in person, we love to spend time with students. We couldn't do any of that. And we did finally we had our festival in person this past July, and we were very lucky that the pandemic calmed down for a brief moment.
Exactly. No, it's really tough. And do you think you'll continue any of those components that you did kind of post-pandemic? It's interesting. I've been talking with some leaders. Some are like, we really just want to get everything full back, kind of, in person the way it was. Others are kind of looking at these hybrid where, we're getting back in person, but we're keeping a couple of these things that we actually found were kind of interesting.
I think we all learned a lot as an industry, and it doesn't mean that putting on a lot of virtual content is not what a lot of people signed up for when they created organizations, became administrators of these organizations. I think it has to fall into each organization's comfort level. However, we found with Chamber Music Northwest that many of our audience members were particularly thankful to have the performances online because even in normal times there were challenges of getting to the concerts, whether that was schedules, children, work, parking, not being able to drive at night, etc. And what we quickly realized is that to supplement our live concerts with performances that people can watch at home would actually be serving our constituents even better. So we are actually planning on not doing high quality video of all of the concerts of this concert season, but most of them.
Gotcha. Awesome. Awesome. Well, it's amazing work that you do, and of course, an amazing program. Well, thought I'd kind of, obviously this past year, there's been lots of conversations about diversity and various aspects in our field. And I was just wondering, kind of from your perspective, what your sense is of especially Asian American, kind of the both experience in our field and kind of if you are seeing any particular trends at all.
Well, what an amazing year! I mean, in this sense, and painful, difficult, but also so wonderful that so many of these conversations about race and representation are really at the front of our minds. I hope that it's going to remain there for a while, and. Just very quickly about my own background, because even as I was thinking about this time together, to say Asian, it's kind of a ridiculous umbrella term, right? It's billions of people we're talking about who don't necessarily feel, as someone pointed out to me, if you are in China or in Korea, you don't think of yourself as Asian, right? You think of yourself as Korean or Chinese. But anyway, it is, this is where the conversation is. So my parents immigrated to the US from Korea in the early 1970s, which was, at that time, there were not many Koreans here, actually. They really started to come over in small numbers. It was after the Korean War. The country was really ravaged. And so my parents were part of the early group to come to do graduate studies here. So I was born here in the US. I started violin here at Suzuki Method. And by the time I was going to conservatory, there were larger numbers of students who had come over. I'm talking about music students who had come over for college, and more immigrants as well who were having children here. So they were part of this first generation, as I was. So this whole, what I do, certainly I feel a very strong connection with Korean heritage. I don't speak fluently. Korean food is still my favorite in the world. I have spent a lot of time on trips there, and I feel very connected to the musical community there. I've probably had more Korean students over the years than from any other single country abroad, as well as Korean Americans. And
a quick question with that. I was just, when you work with young people, do you talk with them about how they might view their music, their performance, and how they can reflect their culture, their kind of heritage through the music, either that they choose or music they create, or even their interpretation of the music they perform? Is that part of?
It is definitely, it's not a huge part of it, but we definitely do have conversations, even together as a group. For instance, as a studio, there might be certain projects that celebrate composers from certain countries. I do encourage all the students to explore composers from their own countries, including in the US as well. And in terms of interpretation, that's very interesting. I mean, without speaking of it, of course, they each bring something deep within from from in their blood, as all musicians do, but as well from the environment you grew up in and the culture you grew up in. Totally different educational systems for example, totally different priorities. And I'll give, since I'm more familiar with the Korean system, I can give that as an example. There are small details, but they actually have big consequences. To get into the middle school or the high schools, the top arts middle schools and high schools, and then the universities as well, the audition repertoire is set for its standard repertoire, the same pieces for everybody, which is actually a wonderful way, a very easy way to be able to see how people compare to one another. Here in the US, it's not at all that way. We have a range. We have certain categories of pieces. You play your solo Bach and your concerto and maybe your classical sonata or something like that. But people are playing different repertoire. So that, you can imagine how that shapes the playing of an entire year of 13-year-olds or 18-year-olds, and many of these studying with the same teacher as well. And the teacher may not be even dictating them to play it in the same way, but it's just, it's much more homogeneous in that way.
Yeah. Gotcha.
Those students sometimes have a little bit of a hard time when they come here and you simply say, well, what do you want to play? and how do you want to play it? And it's not that they're incapable of it. It's just that growing up, that has not been prioritized. And I have seen people really blossom when they come here. A lot of times they come to the US because they want that experience.
Right. Awesome. Awesome. Well, no, and it's very interesting seeing those differentials, especially in the educational settings. And so kind of coming up, switching gears a little bit, but you know, we have these extraordinary performance lives. You have had and continue to have such an extraordinary performance life, but yet you also have all of these administrative leadership roles. And just wondering, because I know there's some of our audience out there who, you know, fight this battle every day. Should I be practicing and preparing for this, but then I've got to deal with this thing, and there's either human resource stuff or people or this person to get hired, or what are we going to perform? I have to decide this, you know, et cetera, all these administrative things. How do you balance it? Do you have a system at all you deploy, or priorities or criteria? How do you kind of divide in such a way that you're able to have such a successful, both administrative as well as performance life?
You don't sleep. Very simple. And I don't recommend it for your health. But I would definitely not be able to do even 25% of what I do without my wife. And we make an amazing team. We have different kinds of strengths, although there are many things we both can handle as well. So she's a very active performer as well. She doesn't teach as much as I do, but our schedules, so as you know, there are deadlines. There are print deadlines, design deadlines, announcement deadlines, and that kind of thing. And if one of us is tied up with something, you know, we're performing there for those 3 days, then the other one can kind of pick up the slack, and we're constantly communicating in that way. We also, it's been gradual over the years that both of us have worked up to these experiences. So there's no way we would be able to handle the volume we do now 15 years ago. So you learn, sometimes painfully, along the way how to do things, how to manage things, crises especially, and finally we have incredible staffs at all of our organizations, and they are so capable and really represent the organizations there in those areas, because we are not in Burlington, Vermont, or in Portland, Oregon all year round. So they really hold down the fort for us.
That is awesome. And of course, I have been Part of it would not be possible, any of the things in my life, without my extraordinary partner, Afa. So I just loved hearing you talk about that kind of depth of collaboration and how important that is. And I think we see that even more, I think, in arts leadership than in many other areas of leadership, that might be out there. And I think just this way to have a partner that we're able to go through life and achieve the professional things too that we do together. It's really, really powerful. So unfortunately, we are just about out of time, but I always like to ask of all my guests, the work that you're doing, and of course the breadth, and even with that collaboration, there's got to be tough days, and days when you just feel like, oh my gosh, this is just too much. On the toughest of days, what do you draw on for strength, for a sense of inspiration during the toughest times?
Wow, that's a good question. I mean, I'll answer in a slightly different way, which is, I think that the experience that Gloria and I have had as performers and confronting all of that, to be a very high level performer, that's a lot of stress. And that's a lot of self-examination and staring failure in the face and failing. So I think that has equipped us for those days that you're talking about. So it really becomes, when you're a performer, you don't have time to really think about those things. You go out and you play, and you make the best of it. And a lot of times, I think even for all of us when we're younger growing up, when we reach deep down, we find something that we didn't know was there. And so now that you're asking, I think that probably has served us best.
Wow. Well, you've had such an extraordinary impact, not only as an administrator of these organizations and especially Chamber Music Northwest, but also as a performer and as a teacher of so many, and the profound impact you've had, including, of course, Sphinx alums. So just, Soovin Kim, thank you. And you truly are one of the arts engines who is powering human creativity in our world. Thank you for being on the show.
Thank you.